Welcome back to day 2 of this quest of ours to dissect the communication process and try to understand what is actually going on. Today we're going to dive straight into the 3 main channels of communication that we normally use, which is our words, our tone of voice, how we say things, and our body language. But before I get started on that, I just want to check in with you about the little homework that I gave you yesterday. Did you have a chance to pay attention to the conversations that was going on around you and maybe even how you yourself felt in your own conversations? If you did, what kind of impression did you get of the different conversations that were going on? Was there something that seemed to be assertive or passive? Did something seem aggressive or relaxed? Did something make you feel that it was a kind and friendly conversation or an unkind and hostile conversation? Did it seem formal or did it seem informal? And did it seem patronizing or was it respectful? If you got sort of a feeling of ambience, what kind of ambience was in those conversations? What exactly in those conversations was it that made you assume that or feel that or perceive that? Do you remember the words that were used exactly? Did you notice something about the body language of the people involved? And what did you feel or what did you pick up about the tone of voice? So, those 3 main things is what makes up the whole process of communication that we do just based on our body and what we have with us, not looking at things like writing, email, phone, that kind of thing. Let's start with the words that we choose to use, more or less consciously when we speak. Are you aware of where your words come from? How, where did you learn to use the words that you choose to use when you formulate sentences, when you formulate your message to other people? You have probably picked up those words from your surroundings throughout your life, from the family situation that you were in, from the education system that you were in, from the friend groups that you are in. And what is interesting to notice about that is the words that you more or less consciously use haven't really been elected by you. You have Your surroundings has an incredibly strong influence over how you have learned to convey your message and what you want to say and how you say it. So if you come from an academic family, you probably have one way of speaking. While if you come from a creative and artistic family, you probably have a different way of speaking. What is important to take away from this section about words is that the words that we use actually bring with them a certain form of energy. Simple thing. The words that we choose to use, even though a small part of the 3 main channels that we use when we communicate, does have a huge effect on the story that our words are creating inside the mind of our communication partner. If you use a lot of adjectives as opposed to speaking in a very dry, unemotional language, that will have a certain effect in the mind of your communication partner. Your words can create an impression of interest or disinterest. It can create connection or it can create distance. It will say something about whether you're solution oriented or problem oriented. It will say something about whether you're taking accountability for the story that you're telling or not. Your choice of words is part of the whole bucket of creating a feeling and a perception in the mind of the other person. Some examples are interest versus disinterest. If somebody's talking and when they stop talking, you immediately start talking about your things, that will signal that you are not very interested in the story that they are telling, even if that is not your intention. If you instead choose to ask the other person a few questions about the story that they were telling or whatever they were sharing with you, that is going to signal to them that you are actually paying attention and that you have an interest in what they are saying. Another is connection versus disconnect. If you choose to tell somebody after they have told you something that I would never do that, That is creating a disconnect from that other person. If you instead say something like, wow, I never really thought about it that way, that is part of creating a connection with the other person. It doesn't really matter if you agree or not. What matters is that you're aware of how your response and the words you choose affect the situation you're in, the relationship, and the connection with the other person. So if you want to connect, you can choose to use connecting words. A third example that I think is really interesting is how you show accountability in the conversation. If you say something and the other person doesn't understand what you're saying, you have a couple of options. You can say, no, you misunderstand what I'm saying completely. Or you can say, I'm sorry, I think I didn't really say that clearly. Let me rephrase. Now, the message is exactly the same, but in the first example, you are giving the other person the responsibility for the misunderstanding. And you might make them feel a bit stupid or inferior. In the second example, you are taking responsibility for the misunderstanding, making the other person feel okay. So the awareness of the words that we choose to use has the power to create connection or distance, has the power to create a friendly ambience or an unfriendly ambience. It has the power to create trust and a feeling of worthiness, or it has the power to create the opposite. So the words that you use actually are important. And the second part is the tone of our voice. And the tone of our voice is influenced by our emotions. If you are really angry and upset, you're probably going to reveal that slightly through the tone of your voice. If you're happy, you're probably going to reveal that also. If you're sad, the same. Another thing that influences the tone of our voice is the relationship that we have with the person we're talking to. Is that someone that you know personally and intimately, or is it someone that you have a more distant relationship with? Is that person someone that you actually like talking to, or is it someone that you think it's difficult talking to? Is this someone that you share the views and values with, or is this someone that has completely different worldview from yours? The mixture of these things, the emotions and the mental state, is going to influence how your tone of voice is. The same with stress. If you're stressed or relaxed, if you have a lot of time or you have not a lot of time, you get a high pitch versus a low pitch. Controlling the tone of voice can be a little bit difficult. So instead of focusing on the actual tone of voice, you can try to focus on your emotional state and your mental state when you are in this situation. That is easier to control. So if you are having a conversation while you are upset and angry, you might want to postpone that conversation till later. Like with a spouse, if you're having an argument, or if your boss is being a jerk at work, things like that. It is possible to extract yourself from that situation and then come back to it later. The third chunk of the three main channels of communication that we use is your body. And that is possibly the one that is easiest to change because it's quite easy to notice. You can actually practice your body language by standing in front of a mirror and see what you look like. Or you can videotape yourself if it's really important to you to have a clear view and a clear impression of what your body language is saying. If you're someone that is doing public speaking or speaking a lot in meetings or presenting stuff at work, that can be a great idea. So a couple of the most important factors you want to look at when we talk about the body language is whether you seem relaxed or uptight. The second part is whether you appear interested and present or disinterested and distant. And that has to do with your direction. Which way is your body directed? Are you facing the person that you're talking to, or are you slightly turning away with both your body and your head? And the third thing is whether you're open or closed. Now, if you want to be perceived as an open person, you need to focus on your posture and try to find a relaxed posture that is also perceived by others as relaxed. So if I cross my arms in front of my body like this, I am probably going to be perceived as closed. I am possibly also going to be perceived as rejecting, possibly suspicious. And if somebody has just uttered an opinion, this might be perceived as disagreement. And obviously, you might feel all that, but whether or not you want to display that feeling is up to you, which is why you just need to be aware of what this looks like to other people. Lastly, I want to say something about our face and our eyes and our gaze and how that possibly can be perceived by other people. Now, we obviously have our conscious use of our mimic in our face. We can smile, we can think, we can look suspicious or grumpy. Parts of our facial expressions are quite easy to get an awareness of and control. Now, you can train yourself to not react to somebody's statements or something that someone is saying, and instead maintain more of a neutral face. And you can obviously control whether you're smiling or not. You can control your eyebrows. You can control a lot of things in your face. But there is one thing that is difficult to control, and that is something that is called micro-expressions. Now, micro-expressions are tiny little contractions in your face that normally happen when you are exposed to something that creates a strong emotion in you. Now, that can be a strong sensation of anger, of sorrow, of sadness, or joy, or surprise, and that happens in the fraction of a second and is not something that you're consciously aware of. Also, it is not something that the other person consciously will see, but somehow our brain is wired in such a way that it will actually pick up on that movement of your face, even though you don't know it, and even if they don't really notice it consciously. So if somebody is telling you a story that makes you completely appalled, it's very difficult for you not to, on one level or another, in your micro expressions, give away that you have that kind of feeling. And the other person is going to sense that their story is creating an emotion within you. I want to address this, even though that is not really something you will be able to control completely, because it is good to be aware of that you are leaking information, not just through your body and your words and your tone of voice, but you're also leaking information through your face and your eyes. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the eyes. So you've probably all heard the quote, "The eyes is the window to the soul." Now that might be true or not, I don't know. But our eyes are a powerful tool in our conversation with others. We can open ourselves up with our eyes, and we can shut ourselves down with our eyes. And I'm not really talking about how you feel on the inside, like the automatic response, but you can actively choose to do this. If you want to be perceived as somebody who is listening, somebody who is open, somebody who is present, use your eyes. You can use your eyes to be open to the other person and the information that they want to give you. You can also use your eyes to shut down and portray to them that you are creating a distance, that you do not want to be close to them. And that is a subtle, subtle shift of our gaze. You can even practice doing that in the mirror if you want. And the strongest impact the use of your eyes will have on a relationship or a conversation that you're in is whether or not you are wanting or willing to look at the other person or not. Now, the best way to exemplify that is actually if you look at it from the receiver's point of view. If somebody's speaking with you and they are not looking at you, how does that make you feel? And I'm not talking about like shifts in your gaze, but somebody who is just not looking at you while they speak. Whether that is intentional or not, choosing not to look at somebody while you speak with them gives a strong sense of rejection. So even if you're not aware, you might, with your eyes only, be saying to this other person that you are not worthy of my gaze. You are not worthy of my attention. You are so bad that I don't even want to look at you. So if any of you find it a little bit difficult to have eye contact with the person that you're talking to, which is quite normal, be aware that if that is something that you do repeatedly and often and most of the time, that is sending a signal or a message to the other person. If that is not something that's important to you, you don't really need to pay attention to it. But if you want to be perceived as a person who is interested, who is present, who is open, and who is welcoming the other person, your eyes is the key to doing that. So we have our words, our body, and the tone of voice that we're using, more or less consciously. And then we have the message that we construct inside our head. And then more or less consciously, we choose the words and we choose the situation that we want to convey that message. And we send it away. And on the other side, we have the recipient of your message that are receiving it, and then they are deconstructing and decoding that message based on their constant or variable filters, based on their state of mind, emotional state, based on their opinions, experiences, and thoughts about you, about the situation, and about the subject at hand. So by now, hopefully, you're starting to see that the mundane activity of speaking and sending information back and forth between you and somebody else has a lot of moving parts that influence how that is working. So for today's challenge, I want you to look in your memory and try to remember if there has been or if you have experienced a situation in your life where something bad happened and where you were insulted or you felt bad or you felt humiliated or anything negative. And then way down the line later, you discovered that the intention of the other person wasn't that at all. Or the thoughts and feelings that you thought that they had at the time were not that at all. Most likely, it's your mind coloring the perception of the situation and not their intentions at all. So I'm going to end this short session about words, tone of voice, and body language with a book recommendation. This book is called Magic Words, and this is a gem. It is written by a guy called Jonah Berger, and the subtitle is What to Say to Get Your Way. Now, don't be alarmed by that title. This is a book that has a lot of science into how the words that we choose to use affect a situation, whether you will be successful in a business meeting, whether you successfully are able to create connection to a friend or a potential friend. And it talks about the huge impact that a subtle change of the words that you use can have in a conversation or in any kind of situation where you are communicating with someone else. So that's a wrap up for today. And I hope that I'm able to connect these little processes together and that you're starting to see a system and a pattern in our communication and why something works and why something doesn't. And I'll see you tomorrow.